What should we look at as kind of a measure of success for this meeting?
The problem is we've been dealing with the China negotiations, and so there's been a lot of pressure on getting some big deliverables, using U.S. leverage. Let's get the big win
right now,
on the China trade talks. North Korea is very different because there isn't really a win to be had in the short term. Most people think denuclearization is never going to happen, but even if it somehow did, you're talking about a 10-year process. So the president's focus right now has to be stable, focused diplomacy, making sure that you're continuing a de-escalatory policy, you're pushing for transparency from the regime, you're pushing for a continued step-by-step movement towards where we want to go without the big win. And so it's a completely different focus. It's one of the reasons I think that the White House wanted to separate the China talks from the North Korea talks, because it's just very different dynamics at each.
He's set up for failure then, because everybody says it's got to be total denuclearization. You don't think there's any possibility, but you think that if there is some progress that could be made in stability and just making sure that we don't have the confrontational sort of stances that we've had, you don't think it's going to happen, and you don't think it can. So what can we possibly accomplish where people will say it was a good summit?
I think this is the most difficult problem on earth, so I think that there isn't a really good solution to this.
Well, they go wild on that to people.
What about declaration? If we can at least get declaration to figure out what they have, that
would be great movement forward. So what we want to do is make sure we know more of where the weapons are. We want to know more of what the capabilities are. We want to make sure that the missile testing ban continues. The problem here is that there's going to be very much of a incentive to give Kim Jong Un some goodies up front. He wants peace. He wants U.S. troops out of South Korea. He wants economic sanctions minimized. And there's always the pull. Just give us this, and we're going to take the next step. But this is what has fooled president after president after president for 20-some years now, and it's very difficult.
Do you think that is likely the idea of us actually pulling troops out of South Korea at this point?
I think unfortunately, it is on the table. President Trump has been very skeptical about troops in Asia. He has said recently that this is not on the table. But I think that as you start talking about a peaceful resolution and people start talking about Nobel Prizes and ending a Korean War that has gone on for 70 years, it's going to be very alluring to start.
How can that happen without not just declaration, but also massive de-escalation and moving towards a real denuclearization? I mean, I understand that this is one of the toughest problems on the planet, but how can we even think about pulling troops out before you get to that step?
We never should.
We're not officially right now, right?
No, we're not officially, and I think there's a strong bipartisan consensus that it's a terrible idea. But again, the president has said that U.S. troops around the world being global policemen, he hasn't liked that, and so when the president sets a tone on these things, it gets difficult.
South Korea has actually agreed to start paying more for what we are doing to keep the troops there. What would, in your mind, be a legitimate situation where or a legitimate upfront give me that we could give? Is it bringing down some of the economic tariffs that are there, or economic sanctions?
We have to be very careful, because any economic sanctions we take off are going to be almost impossible to put back on unless there's a serious provocation. So what the plan has always been was to get upfront concessions from the Kim regime about transparency and weapon sites and other things, and then to move on from there. If they're not seeing progress, then the White House can be in a very difficult position, because they're going to either have to declare, hey, what we're doing is not working, or they're going to have to give Kim more and more. And this is the exact trap that everyone has fallen in for 20 years.
Does the prosperity carrot for his people, does that appeal to this guy? I mean, they made a tape that had, hotels on the coast in North Korea, and I don't know, some of these things you'd want, like speedboats, all these things to show him, to appeal to him that you could be an economic story like South Korea, which has been a miracle over the past 50 years.
Or Vietnam.
Right. Or Vietnam. Do you want that for your people, or is he just fine staying in power? Because he's got all those things.
Right.
Does he want them for...
care about the people.
Yeah, does he want them for his peace?
No, I think that this North Korean leader would like the opportunity to break out of the rogue state status and to better the economy and to better the people. But he will not do that at the expense of giving up his survival guarantee, which is a nuclear weapon. So this becomes very, very difficult. When the closer people get to this, the more they realize that there's no easy scenario where Kim gives up weapons. We can push him more and more towards that.
If he has nuclear capabilities, what does 28,000 troops on the border mean anyway?
Well, 28,000 troops are not necessarily geared all towards North Korea. And that's,
but are troops that are there, protecting South Korea, if it's a nuclear power?
Well, because
what good is
because the idea of a ground war is still
right,
one that he could get away with
right.
and not have the same global condemnation as a nuclear attack.
Right.
There's also a signal that would be sent if the U.S. started pulling troops out after 70 years. What are you saying? Is the U.S. less engaged in Asia? Is it less engaged in South Korea? It's a treaty ally. There are a lot of signals that would be sent by just pulling troops out of there. So,
but it would be a goal for us to have
eventually
at some point in the future.
Sure, when they actually give
up. In some beautiful future.
It's like 70s, okay, is 170? I mean, it'd be nice. 80, 90? Where do you?
Well, it depends what's happening with China.
I know.
I think that's the other.
And how much can we count on China to actually back us up on this?
They're not. Look, China has Chinese national interests, and they're going to keep pushing. So the idea that we're going to pull out and China's going to move in, yeah, they'll move in, but it'll be against U.S. interests on almost every issue.
What do you think that President Xi, when he's watching this today, is looking exactly for?
He said he's just probably has a big bowl of popcorn and just pop in his mouth. He said, "This is fantastic. We've got the U.S. president in a no-win situation. We're being incentivized to help out. We're doing what we can. This is great. The more he's worried about them, the less he's worried about us. And this is what's happening. North Korea is a wonderful foil for good policy and good diplomacy."